Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday night after hours live Ask Chuck Bowser, RCDD, your favorite questions. So we're here live tonight, broadcasting on all three channels, YouTube, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. I had to change the LinkedIn URL in the middle of the week because, long story short, I selected the wrong profile. I had to fix it. Unfortunately, 35 people said they were attending, but to the other profile. So hopefully they make it over to this stream. It's a pleasure to have everybody. We already got some people in the house already. Kyle's in the house. George is in the house. We got 8 or 9 people in the thing. I can't tell who you are. If you're here, do me a favor. Just check in on the chat box. Tell us who you are and where you're from. Also, we always start off every Thursday night after hours live session with, what are you drinking? So tonight I am drinking from a glass that my daughter gave me for Father's Day. It says, I don't snore. I dream on a motorcycle. She must love her daddy. But tonight it is just ice water. So make sure you put in, and I'll probably drink several times throughout tonight because I taught for the last 3 consecutive days. So my throat is kind of dry, so make sure you put in the chat box as well. What is it that you are drinking? Shotzi's in the house. He is drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. George, what are you drinking? Kyle, are you drinking anything tonight? So there you go. Bud Light Draft. Dude, you can't come to the channel with something like that and not offer it to everybody else. What's up with that? Yeah. And I apologize if you... in the background, if you hear Barbie cooking dinner, I'm threading the needle tonight because we are taking boat safety classes this week, and it starts at 6:30. So she's cooking dinner now, and so you might hear her in the background. Forrest is in the house. It's morning in Korea. What time in the morning is it, Forrest? Let me know. And thank you for the answers to help that question. I'm going to be talking about that tonight, by the way. Phil Miller's in the house. He is a glass of Merlot. You mean the wine, Mr. Phil? Is that what you mean? So one of my hobbies, for those who may not know this, let me turn off that banner. One of my hobbies is I like to make my own wine. And Merlot is one of my favorite wines to make. It's actually a pretty easy process. A lot of people are surprised how easy it really is. And when you get done, you have 6 gallons of it. Yeah, 6 gallons of it. So, yeah, gotta love it, gotta love it. And so what is George saying here? Because I have my boating certificate. Good for you, Mr. George. I didn't necessarily have to take it because of Florida, but I wanted to be safe, right? I wanted to be safe. And so Kyle's virtually sharing. Here we go. Here's a toast. Okay, everybody ready? There you go. There we go. That was a really good Bud Light draft, Mr. Kyle. I appreciate that. Mr. Bill is in the house. How you doing, Bill? Glad to see. Looks like you changed your profile picture. Is that new? I don't remember seeing that one. And Mark is drinking an Americano. I don't know what Americano is. I think didn't we have that conversation last week? I don't remember. So. And Phil is in the Fury. You already said you were here, Phil. So there you go. Now I did. There you go. That's why you're watching via YouTube. Okay, that's why I didn't recognize the profile pic. Now, because I'm running tight on my schedule, I did not get a chance to make my acronym challenge tonight. You know me. I like to put up an acronym challenge, and I like to put it up here and let people guess it. So I'm just going to do it manually tonight. So tonight's acronym is ABF. ABF. What is it? What is ABF? If you know what ABF is, then put it in the chat box. Mark is drinking espresso and hot water. Oh, very cool. That's what that is. Thank you, Mr. Mark. So what does the acronym ABF mean? Do my Jeopardy theme music. Do, 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 do. Do 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 do. Nobody wants to guess ABF. Really? It's an easy one. I'll give you the first one. AIR. AIR. What does the B and the F stand for? ABF. What's the acronym ABF? Oh, and of course, I can't do my acronym challenge without doing my public service announcement. Help control the population of acronyms. Have your acronyms spayed or neutered. We have enough acronyms. We don't need any more. Quit changing acronyms. That's a good guess, Phil. That actually ABF is one of the acronyms, ABF, but that wasn't the one I was looking for tonight. Kyle got it. Air-blown fiber. Air-blown fiber. Hey, extra points for anybody if they put in the chat box that I have installed air-blown fiber. The Sumitomo system or one of the others out there, let me know if you've installed air-blown fiber. I've done a couple projects with air-blown fiber. Okay, no more draft beer for me, Kyle. Don't share anymore, okay? Because it's already affecting my language here. So I did a couple projects with air-blown fiber. It's really cool stuff. So you got these tubes, and then you got to put a steel in, you got to blow it through and stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. I like it's cool. It has its advantages and disadvantages. If you got a customer really going to be changing their stuff around a lot, air-blown fiber is really going to help with that. So, alrighty. So let's get on to the. By the way, if you have a question, put it in the chat box. Put your questions in the chat box. There we go. I'll leave that up for the rest of the session here today. So that way people come in, it reminds them, hey, if you have a question, put it in the chat box. But I got lots of great questions tonight. I'm hoping to get through all of them. So, of course, we always have to start off our question sessions with the appropriate PPE, right? Appropriate PPE. So I'm going to put on my safety glasses so none of the words jump off the page of my notebook and injure my eye. Appropriate PPE, right? Yeah. So the first question that I got was actually a pretty good one. What Kyle says, Europeans use ABF more than Americans. You're right there, Kyle. I agree with that 100%. The federal government uses ABF the most of anybody in the U.S. So good point. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Kyle. The first question was, and I forgot to mark down who it came from, and it was basically asking about how do you manage a crisis? Now, the person didn't say what position they were in, so I don't know if they were foreman. I don't know if they were project manager. I don't know if they're a business owner, because the ability to manage that crisis is really going to vary depending on what level you are, right? So I'm just going to give you some helpful hints on next time you have to deal with a crisis, some things you can do to kind of help you with that process, right? So the first thing is, number one, you need to know about crisis, is it's really going to reveal who you are, because it's going to be different from your day-to-day operations. You're going to be under stress, and not only going to reveal who you are, you have to be super careful, because people remember how you reacted under that stressful situation. Now, so, and the difference between reacting to a crisis and just regular planning is regular planning, you got lots of time to plan the event and stuff. Crisis, you're in reaction mode. You're shooting from the hip. That's why you got to have your skills done so well that you can do them, like muscle memory, right? Your management skills. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you is you need to do as much planning for crisis as you can have. You can never pick what kind of crisis you're going to have, but there are some things you can kind of set in place before crises actually happen, which help you mitigate those issues. Because when it actually happens, you're going to have little time to plan for that crisis. And I'm going to talk about one of the crises that I had to deal with when I was in the field. And it's going to challenge you as a leader, because you're going to be working lots of hours, lots of stressful situation, and it's really gonna it's gonna be your new reality until you get past that crisis. It really is, and you may not have, and you're gonna have to drop pretty much like everything you're doing to manage that crisis, and that's gonna really have an impact. So you have to. That's why a good crisis management plan will kind of help for that kind of stuff. So the first step is you have to identify who all is impacted by this crisis. Now, what do I mean by that? Right. So let's say you have a project. I'll use my project that I did that went into crisis mode. It was a call center in Ohio. Trying to remember the name of the town. It was a small little town, right? It's somewhere near Cleveland too. I can't remember. It's not important anyway. And it was a customer that we'd done projects for in the past, and we had some issues, and basically we got behind. All kinds of stuff happened. And so as soon as I realized there's a problem, I had to notify everybody that was a stakeholder to that project. And a lot of people, don't really think about this, right? Let's talk about the direct people impacted, right? Your crews. Okay, guys, we're going to have to step up. We're going to step up production. We're going to have to work after extra hours. There's not going to be no off time, and don't even think about calling in sick, right? Your crew. You need to notify your customer, because there's a potential that your schedule is going to be impacted, right? And the not so obvious. You might have to call payroll to let them know, hey, we need more per diem. We're going to be working a bunch of overtime, because it's going to impact them and their ability to do that job. You might even have to notify the supply chain, right? You might have to contact your manufacturer and say, hey, those jacks that we need them earlier, like tomorrow, like overnighted, first thing in the morning, right? If you're buying from like a Gray Bar, an Annex, or whatever, contact them as well, because they're the ones who's getting you that material, right? So Kyle says, ensure you have a contingency to reserve for the unknowns. That's actually a great point, Kyle. So one of the project management things that we used to do when I used to work for a large cable contractor, we would have a work chart that we'd go through. We would identify different types of things that can happen, and we would assess a risk value to that. And then based on that, we can actually come up with how much extra we need to put on the project to account for that OT or whatever it is. So yeah, contingencies, absolutely. Mark says, welcome to his everyday. Every day is a risk management for you, Mark. Okay. And then Kyle says, approve the OT, hoping that you have the reserve flow time and the money. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So there are some things you can do. You can bring in extra crew members and go to maybe like 410s, 412s. So that way you can have almost like around the clock kind of thing going without the OT. But if you do, in my particular scenario, it was an out of town project. So that would have been per diem and OT. So you just got to kind of weigh out the cost and see which is going to be the best for that. Right. And then obviously, like I said, let the customer know. And then the next most important thing that you want to do when you're going through a crisis is you want to lead through authenticity, right? Your crew, the general contractor, the customer, they're going to be able to tell who you are. And hopefully you've already set this foundation, because they know that you're a stand-up person, that you're going to do the right thing. And sometimes that means, hello, Fernando. How you doing, buddy? What are you drinking? What you drinking, Fernando? Because you need that good foundation. That way they have the trust that you're going to be able to resolve that situation, right? And if you do that, then that's also going to inspire the crew and the people you're working with, that you're going to be able to work your way through that crisis, right? So you got to have that. And then, excuse me, and all that step of just authentically, really, you should be doing that way before you come into a crisis. How you respond to things every single day is going to dictate. I don't know what's going on in my throat today. I apologize. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the 3 classes I taught this week. I guarantee it. And then be yourself. What happens is stress changes people. I can say this because my wife's not in the room with me, but when she gets stressed, she changes into a different person. When I get stressed, I'm the same person. I'll deal with it, and I'll just work my way through it. Right. So stress affects everybody differently, physically, mentally, and how they react to things. The next thing you want to do is probably organize a crisis team, right? And when you organize a crisis team, you're going to bring in experts. You're going to bring in people that can support your stuff. And when you organize a crisis team, tell them at the door, check your egos at the door, and hierarchy and office politics at the door. We got a problem, and we got to work our way through it. Mark says, the sea will never be calm. It's funny you mentioned it, because we actually bought a boat and we're picking it up this weekend. And I read a meme somewhere once. Good sailors aren't made in calm weather, right? So good project managers, they're forged through crisis and crisis intervention and stuff like that, right? So organize a crisis team. Tell them, check your ego at the door, check your title at the door, and And then check, what was the third thing when I said? I can't remember off the top of my head. Check them at the door, because we got a problem we got to work through, and that's going to be the best thing to do. And also try to surround yourself with the best experts. And make sure you let this crisis team, here's the problem, here's my weaknesses, here's what I don't know how to fix. And you're bringing that person in there for a reason. I'll give you an example. In that crisis that I went through in Niles, Ohio. Niles, Ohio. That's where that project was. It involved the fiber backbone. And at the time, I was a project manager, and I did have some fiber experience, but I wasn't experienced on this particular products that we were installing. So when we did our crisis team, we brought some people up who had expertise in that system. And I'll go ahead and say it. This is kind of why I said ABF today, airborne fiber, right? At the time we had a crew specifically designated for a project at the Pentagon. That's all they did was ABF. So we actually took them off the Pentagon, brought them to Ohio to fix that project, right? So we brought in experts. So when I was out there presenting things, I knew that my expertise was not air-blown fiber. So I listened to the input from that crew. So make sure that you surround yourself with experts and admit that you don't know what you don't know. You're in a crisis and you're there to help fix everything, right? Now, here's what's going to happen. Especially I'll say this, a lot of men are afraid to admit that they don't know something or they don't know how to handle something. When you're in that kind of a scenario where you're doing a crisis kind of a thing, right? It is when you tell them that you don't know everything, that actually inspires them to help you. So take care, Kyle. That inspires them to take care of you and help you get through the situation. That's why I said, that's why you check that ego at the door. That was the third thing. I couldn't remember what it was that we were talking about. And then also you got to make sure that you prove to them that you're willing to listen to solve those kinds of issues, right? Oh, hold on. I think we got a potential question here. I'll come back and circle around to your question here in a minute, Nick. So when it comes to making decisions, you have to make some really tough decisions on the fly quickly. You're not going to have time to do that. And when you're making the decisions to solve the problems, don't just put a Band-Aid on it. Find the root cause, right? So one of the issues that we had was with the project denial, the crew that we had doing ABF, they didn't have that much experience. Well, actually, they told me that experience. And I found out later they didn't. They didn't. So the Band-Aid would have been to bring out, just to let them try to fix that problem. No, the root cause was the crew. So we got rid of those guys. We sent them back to the union hall, and we brought in some of our fiber guys because we had a portability agreement with the local union that we could bring in our own people, right? So we didn't put a Band-Aid on. We found the root cause, and then we got right to it, and we fixed it. Another important thing for crisis management, lead from the front. Right? Be out front. You're the one, you're the project manager, you're the foreman, whatever. You're the one making those decisions, and be willing to take credit for what went wrong, and make sure that you give your crews for the stuff that goes right. Lead from the front. Make sure that you foster a sense of urgency. Make sure that you build some kind of cohesiveness with that. And then you're going to have to communicate probably statuses throughout the time of this crisis. I had to do that with the upper management with H&M when I did this. So make sure when you do your communications that they already know you're behind. Be completely honest and truthful about everything. Don't hide anything. Here's where we stand. Here's what we got done. Stuff like that. That will help a lot. And then after you get past that, then you got to start thinking about what can we do to avoid this from happening in the future, right? You have to adopt or adapt to your new normal, right? So a lot of times what we would do is we would do lessons learned after a project. So we'd sit down and the project manager had to write down everything went right with the project, everything went wrong with the project, and we sat down and had a frank conversation. And we knew going into that lessons learned, it wasn't going to be used to beat you over the head. It was going to be used so we can learn to not have that mistake again. And if you work for a company that has more than one office, do lessons learned between those offices, especially when you have those kinds of issues. So those are some tips there to handle management crises, right? So the next question comes from Mike in Portland. And Mike says, Chuck, do I have to use a cable stripper? Why can't I use my Snips? I answered this question already. I answered it on the December 10th show. So go to the December 10th show and watch it. If you go to letstalkcabling.com, click on the menu, the one will say live streams, click on that, go down to the December 10th show, and even got the questions listed underneath of them. Find the one that says Snips versus strippers, and then you can go watch the entire thing. But the quick answer is you can use Snips. Just got to be careful that you don't give yourself a shiner, right? But that video goes more in depth, so go there. The third question for tonight's show is from Jesus in Chicago, and says, Chuck, do I have to run a ground conductor from each shielded patch panel to the bus bar? Well, the first thing I want to touch base on, you're not grounding it. You're bonding it to a ground. That's two totally different things, right? When you run a conductor from a piece of equipment to a bus bar, you're bonding that to the ground. The only time you're grounding something is when you're driving a piece of metal into the earth. That's when you're grounding something, right? So make sure you understand that first. And second off, they wanted to run, if they had to run a conductor from each panel back to the bus bar. You don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that, because then each one of those conductors for that shielded patch panel are going to be different lengths. So that's going to cause you problems, right? So there's 3 ways that you can actually do that. And I'm going to go from a good to better to best. So the good solution is when you bond that rack to the bus bar, bring that bonded conductor all the way down and attach it at the base. And then each of those shielded patch panels, you're just going to run a short jumper over and then attach it to the conductor that comes down the length of the rack. That's one way you can do that. Another way that you can do that is use what's called a horizontal rack grounding bus bar. So you put a grounding bus bar at the top, and then you run a short conductor from each of those racks up to that horizontal grounding bus bar in that relay rack. Again, that's not a really good scenario because each of those conductors are going to be different lengths. You want to keep those conductors the same length as much as possible. I think the best way, and unfortunately is probably the most expensive way, is a vertically mounted rack grounding bus bar. Then you're just going to run a short jumper over to that vertically mounted rack grounding bus bar. So all your conductors are the same length, and that's going to help, right? Let's see, what's Nick's question? Nick says, I am currently going through a career change. I will be leaving my current company, an integrator, and position as an estimator, and starting an engineering firm as communications engineer. What are some of the biggest challenges I should be aware of during this transition? So, Nick, make sure I understand your question. Are you starting your own business, or are you going to a company that does that? Because if you're starting your own business, you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff on your plate, right? Now, you got to worry about where the next dollar's coming from. You got to worry about your insurances. You got to worry about how you're going to pay things when money's not coming in if you are starting your own business. But if you're starting over as an engineering firm, where are you going to get your work from, right? That's one of the biggest concerns. You got to figure out where that work is going to come from. And you got to figure out how to get your name out there so people recognize it, and then people can understand that you're going to be a good company. So he's going to a company. So that's already there. Okay, great. So in that position, right, as a communications engineer, a lot of times there are different disciplines. So you might be asked to do one particular thing. I would do research on that discipline as much as possible, exhaustively. I would also do my research on that company. So that way you kind of get a good feel for the company when you go there, right? Forrest asks, is that available to use in Cat 6A UTP between a building without protected entrance terminal? The cable would be pulled through underground conduit that is only 10 meters between the two buildings, especially area substation adjacent area. Okay, so now Forrest, I happen to know, because you and I have communicated in the past, you're not in the U.S. You're in Korea. So my answer is really going to be based on the U.S. Now, in the U.S., you are allowed to run a cable between two buildings as long as that distance is less than 142 feet without having to put building entrance protection on it. I'm going to tell you right now, you should always want to put building entrance protection on it, but you don't necessarily have to. Now, because you said you have a substation in the area, because lightning wants to strike the tallest object. That's where that 142 feet comes from. So theoretically, lightning is going to strike the building and not anything in that cone of protection, as they like to call it. But since you mentioned an area substation, right, then now you got to worry about some EMI and voltage oversurges, not necessarily lightning. So you got to think about that. So really look at the distances between it. Because you got the substation and you don't have the requirement to do the NEC because you're in Korea, not in the US, I would still put lightning protection on it. I really would, because this is not a performance issue. This is a life safety issue. If something happens, property is going to get damaged. People are going to get hurt. A lightning protection system for a Cat 6A UTB cable is not that expensive. How much is it worth to you for that peace of mind? So I would put it on. I would absolutely put it on. Oh, it's for an oil plant in Saudi Arabia. Very cool. That's one of the things that really impresses me about this whole podcast thing that I started, because I envisioned that I'd be, talking to people. I would say probably 30 to 40% of my audience is outside of the U.S. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Korea, everywhere else. I've got audience members from everywhere, and I just think that's absolutely cool. So the next question is from Daryl in Springfield. Daryl says, I'm installing my own conduit. Been doing it for about 2 years. I struggle with bending the conduit. I can never get two pieces to match. How can I do this better? My suggestion there, buy the pre-made ones. The pre-made ones. That way you don't have to worry about it. Because when you're bending conduit, you got that right. Because I use conduit for here on the farm all the time, building chicken stuff like that. And I can never bend two the same way either. So if you buy the pre-made stuff, it already is made for you, right? And here's the cool thing, right? You can buy them in 11.25 degrees. You buy them in 22.5 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and 90 degrees. All ready to go. And I hear you already. But Chuck, what if it's 60 degrees? Well, guess what? You can take a 45 and a 15, put them together. You got a 60. And if you're using the pre-made stuff, all your bends are going to match. One of the things I love looking at on the internet, I love looking at the pictures with of people dressing their cables. By the way, if you got some pictures of some cable where closet you dress out and you want me to see it, email it to me. If I like it, I'll put it on the webpage. I'll put it on my social media. Chuck at letstalkcabling.com. Like looking at that stuff. But another thing I like looking at is conduit installations. There are some electricians out there that can bend conduit, and you can see these really complex systems, and they'll have 10, 20 pieces of conduit all going up, having the exact same bend, and just how do they do that? I don't have the skill sets for that. So my suggestion to you, Daryl, is buy the pre-manufactured stuff. Matter of fact, the Bixby ICT Field Manual, the book that I tell everybody you should get, these, right? It actually recommends using the factory ones. That way you can resolve those kinds of issues. And you always have the exact bend. You always have that exact bend, right? And so the last question was from a question from last week. And I'm going to alt tab over to see that. Actually, it's two questions here, actually. So this question was from Hassam last week. And I didn't have the time to get all the input back from. So he had a couple questions. His first question, give him a little background. So Hassam says, I'm interested in getting some guidance for my future career after getting my RCDD early this year. So that he just recently got his RCDD. Congratulations, Hassam. I'll have to teach you the super secret RCDD handshake. And he says, my vision for the next 2 years is to become an experienced technical consultant or project manager for data centers. Please allow me for a couple questions. The first one is, I'm wondering if it's better for me to either do the DCDC or the PMP, which is most important for me right now. My suggestion is, since you're pursuing the technical consultant for data centers, get your DCDC first. Right? Get your DCDC first. That's my first suggestion. And then go for your PMP. Now, when you go for your PMP, you can go for the PMI's PMP, or you can do the Bixby RTPM. I did a whole complete series on comparing and contrasting those two different certifications, so make sure you go watch that. His next question was, previously he worked as an estimating engineer and a sales engineer, so getting my RCD means I am familiar with the regulations and distribution sizing. Although not in practice, I am not a sales manager. I am now a sales manager. Learning the field is not practical because he's a sales manager, only theoretical. What are some of the sessions or trainings that can help you with this? Look towards your manufacturers. Establish the relationship with the manufacturer that you're going to want to have a good working relationship. And a lot of those have training, and they'll tell you the good and the bad stuff to kind of help you with those products. His last question is, what is the demand for RCDD in Far East countries as compared to the Gulf? What about Africa? Any new regions besides Europe and the United States have begun to require RCDD engineering? And this is why it took me a week and a half to answer this question, because, again, I'm in the U.S. So I reached out to Forrest, who's here tonight, and a couple other people. And I found that while there is a requirement for RCDs in Asia and Europe or not Europe, the Middle East and stuff like that, it's not to the same level as it is here in the U.S., unless you're doing work on a U.S. military base or for a U.S. contractor. Then you'll most likely will see that RCD requirement. So outside of that, they're working on, because it's identified as a market, and they're working, I guess, towards getting them more exposure there, and they're getting more and more. But the people that I talk to right now, they say, well, there is some, there's not a whole lot, right? So then the last question is from Joe from Virginia. Joe, I apologize because your question got buried in my emails, and I didn't see it until today. And he said, Chuck, I left the post on your After Hours podcast on YouTube, but I wanted to send an email as well. He says, I'm currently working as a network installation project manager for a government contract, and I'm getting the new program set up. We're about 2 months into a 7-year program, upgrading the network infrastructure at the MEPs across the country. I have some cable experience as an installer, QC, quality control, and project management. One of the things that I come across, but I don't see standardized, is cable run lists. Cable run lists. I am missing it. Is there a best practice for creating a cable run list? Now, for those who may not know what a cable run list is, right? A cable run list is where you know what the lengths of all your runs, and then you figure out the way which cables you pull in what order, so you can get the maximum out of each spool. So it's a little planning up in front, but there's a lot of reward on the backside. And you're right, there is no standard for how to generate cable run lists. But I do suggest that everybody learn that process, because it will help make your project a lot easier, and less wasted cable. And your boss is going to like that less wasted cable, right? Well, we hit our 30 minutes. Does anybody have any additional questions? I'll give you a couple seconds while you're doing that. I can smell the dinner. And I got my puppy. The original cable dog is back here with me. There he is. Let's see if I can get him back here. Where is he? See? There's the original cable dog right there. That's Nico. He's my 10-month-old German Shepherd. So, no questions? All righty then. If you have a question, go ahead and submit it to questions@letstalkcabling.com, and I'll make sure I put it in the next show. Until next week, everybody, be safe.